Good evening. Tonight we'll be reading Wheedle on the Needle. This is by Stephen Cosgrove. This was one of my favorite books when I was growing up. There's a Wheedle on the Needle. Many, many years ago, before explorers sailed to the northwest, there lived a large, happy creature called the Wheedle. He was pleasingly plump, covered in orange, fluffy fur, and he had a big, round, red nose. He spent his days sniffing flowers and enjoying the peace and the quiet that nature offered. Forever and a day, everything was peaceful, until one afternoon, the Wheedle watched curiously as a large ship sailed into the bay. Laughing loudly, workers jumped from the ship and set about clearing the land and building this, that, and other things. As they worked, they whistled, and the more they worked, the more they whistled. All that whistling hurt the poor Wheedle's ears. The whistling continued night and day, and the Wheedle could get absolutely no sleep at all. With no sleep, he became grouchier and grouchier. If he was ever to get some sleep, the Wheedle knew he must put a stop to all this whistling. He thought. If the workers don't have their tools, they won't be able to work, and if they can't work, they won't whistle. So later that night, he sneaked into the workers' camp and he took all their tools. Sadly for the Wheedle, the next morning, the men quickly got new tools from the ship and went back to work, whistling even louder than before. If anything, the Wheedle was resourceful. He decided the next best thing to do was to scare the workers. For when workers are scared, they can't pucker, and when they can't pucker, they can't whistle. As we all know, a puckerless whistle is no whistle at all. One by one, he began creeping up behind them and growling at the top of his voice. Sure enough, the workers were so scared they couldn't whistle a whit. All would have been the Wheedle's salvation, save for one brave lumberjack, who, to prove he wasn't scared, simply whistled. The Wheedle put his hands over his ears and ran into the forest. Well, let me tell you, that did it. The Wheedle knew he could no longer live near the bay, so he packed his belongings and he left. He wandered high into the mountains, searching for a place far enough away from the workers that he wouldn't hear the whistling. He wandered and wandered until he came to the very top of Mount Rainier. He listened very carefully. What delight! He couldn't even hear a whisper of a whistle on the wind. He quickly unpacked his sleeping bag, his toothbrush with the squiggly on the end, and his white woolly pajamas. This was quite the place he'd hoped for. This was a place where he could sleep for a long, long time. He quickly brushed his teeth, washed his furry hands, and slipped into his woolly pajamas. Then he slid his big body into a sleeping sack, flopped his head on his pillow, and fell fast asleep. He was so happy in his deep sleep that his big red nose blinked on and off, like a flashing beacon on a tall pole. He slept through the night, through the day, through weeks and months, and on through several years. Oh, such sweet dreams. But after a long while, something woke the Wheedle from his deep sleep. It might not be good. Whistling. Loud whistling. Happy whistling. He looked around and much to his surprise he saw that the workers had continued to build over the years and now had built almost to the edge of his mountain. But what was more alarming was that now everybody was whistling. Children and workers alike. Oh no, cried the Wheedle. What am I ever to do with all this whistling? I'll never get back to sleep. He began pacing up and down the mountain, mumbling and grumbling all the while. Then his nose lit up and a smile crossed his lips. I've got it, he chuckled, and with that he removed everything from his large striped bag, and with it dragging behind he climbed to the very top of Mount Rainier. He stood on his fuzzy tiptoes, reaching up into the sky and grabbed a cloud. Then he grabbed another and another. One by one he stuffed the clouds into the bag until he had it too full to overflowing. With the bag thrown over his shoulder, he set out for the source of this noisy whistling problem, the growing city of Seattle. The skyline in the city was filled with tall buildings, but the Wheedle only needed one to complete his plan. And the one he chose was a Space Needle. Giddy to put his plan in action, he hurried to the base of the Space Needle, jumped into the elevator, and zipped to the very top. There he stood and looked about. All around were happy children and workers all whistling and laughing and having a great time. The Wheedle chuckled as he reached deep into his soggy bag. He grabbed a fluffy cloud by the tail and then slung it around and around and flipped it out into the air. The cloud lifted high into the sky and then hung there like a glob of whipped cream on a blue kitchen ceiling. The cloud gurgled, it sloshed, then one drop of rain fell, and then another. Soon it was pouring. Now the kindly folks in Seattle, they like the rain, but it's nearly impossible and highly improbable that one can whistle with any intensity in a rainstorm. With the rain falling all around, everyone ran inside, and soon it became very still and very quiet indeed. The Wheedle stretched out on top of the Space Needle, and using the bag of clouds as a pillow, he fell fast asleep. With each snorkel snore, his big red nose slowly blinked on and off. And as he slept, it rained. And it rained. And it rained. The people of Seattle had to stay inside, and they became very sad. It didn't take much to figure out that someone was throwing clouds into the sky from the top of the Space Needle. Finally, the mayor himself went to the Wheedle on the Needle to plead with him to stop throwing rain clouds into the sky. Please, said the mayor, would you stop throwing clouds into the sky? The kindly folk of Seattle love to whistle while they work, but with all the rain there's little to whistle about, and without whistling there's little work being done. The Wheedle said he was sorry, but still, in all, he couldn't sleep when he heard the whistling. There was nothing he could do. Now the mayor thought and thought, and quickly devised a plan, a wonderful plan indeed. The mayor's plan was simple. A simple plan is sometimes simplicity is best. All through the night into the next morning, sailmakers stitched and sewed cotton, flannel, and wool. Miles of thread were laced through the eyes of needles as the weathered hands of the sailmakers sewed. They sewed pink flannel onto yellow wool and blue cotton onto red flannel, and by early morning they'd finished the task. Whoever said mayors never think a thoughtful thought? This was a good plan. This plan was great. Let's see what they're doing. At precisely noon, not a minute before, and not a minute after, the mayor again met with the Wheedle on the needle. In his hands, he held the largest pair of earmuffs you've ever seen. These earmuffs are for you, said the mayor in his most political of voices. With these on your ears, you won't hear a thing. You won't hear us whistle. You won't even hear the big whistles from the ships in the harbour or the trains going by. The Wheedle pulled on the earmuffs over his ears and was surrounded in the delight of silence. He didn't hear the kindly folk of Seattle cheering. He didn't hear the end of the mayor's speech. With the earmuffs in place, he simply rolled over and fell fast asleep. So content was he that his big red nose again began to blink. There's a Wheedle on the needle. I know just what you're thinking, but if you look up late at night, you'll see his red nose blinking. Again, this was one of my favourite stories when I was a wee one, so I love to share it. Thank you.